Hello, this is Court Watch with Alex Sawyer, and I'm excited to bring you the latest episode of my podcast, where I am joined by former Arizona Solicitor General O.H. Skinner. Mr. Skinner will discuss some important environmental cases pending before the Supreme Court. One, involving Chevron, deals with several parishes in Louisiana that have sued the state's energy providers for coastal erosion that they claim happened during World War II. That case is scheduled to be argued in January. Another case out of Colorado is pending before the justices who have yet to take it up, which involves localities suing for big oil over alleged climate change. Thank you, Mr. Skinner, for joining me. I wanted to first ask you about, I believe the case name is Suncor versus Boulder County. I want to start with that one. So it's Colorado localities, I believe, that sued over climate change. They sued big oil. Is that exactly what this case is about? And why should the Supreme Court take it up?
Yeah, so this is one of a bevy of cases where you have very progressive enclaves like Boulder or Honolulu or Oakland suing basically all of the U.S. Based energy companies.
Yes.
And the basic case is climate change is bad. It's causing all sorts of costs where we live. And so we need all of these energy companies to foist over billions of dollars for us to rebuild our infrastructure. And what they really want is a large pot of money to go into a fund to basically get divvied out to left-wing nonprofits and NGOs to implement all the same policies that they tried to get through Congress with the Green New Deal. And so basically what you're seeing is a turn to the courts to try to unlock funding and policy outcomes that, like, traditionally we would have think would come from Congress.
Yeah.
And so there's a big question for the Supreme Court about whether you can really, under public nuisance theory, allow one local government to affect nationwide policy. Because in order to get relief, I mean, they identify a nuisance as climate change, right? Well, and it's not just climate change, it's global climate change. They always say global climate change. And so in order to actually get the effects of global climate change to stop in Boulder, they need the energy companies to change their behavior everywhere in the globe.
Yeah.
And so that starts to really press on some, like, very important questions, including questions about, like, state sovereignty, because that Boulder lawsuit will affect, as a bunch of states have said, what these companies are doing in Alabama or in Florida
Right.
or in very far afield
Let
places.
me ask you, so I've been following some of this. You mentioned like Hawaii. So I know there was a case out in Hawaii, city of Honolulu, I believe. And then there was one, I think, out of New York too, if I'm thinking correctly.
Mhm.
So these have popped up everywhere. How have courts handled them? And I know, at least in the past, I think there has been some issues that have been presented to the Supreme Court surrounding this, like if these can be moved from, I think it's state court to federal court. Tell me if I'm
Yeah.
wrong. But like, what's kind of the lay of the land for your layperson that's not a lawyer on this?
Right. So the lay of the land is, like, the rubber is finally hitting the road. If you want to separate away from, like, most of the legal jargon, all of the earlier fights were what court would get to decide some of these questions, whether it be state court or federal court. And that was not obvious that that would be, like, outcome determinative in the case. Now you're starting to see in Hawaii and in some of these that these are finally state Supreme Courts saying that these cases get to proceed. You were finally at the point where you're getting the Supreme Court to be asked to take these cases at a place where the real question is, like, can they go forward at all?
Yeah.
Right? Is kind of how is and so for your average person, this is the much more interesting time to talk about these cases, because it's not just, oh, the Eastern District of Maryland, or it becomes much more concrete. And the more of these cases that come up, the more important it's going to be for the Supreme Court to say something. Otherwise, as we all know, with lawfare, the number of these that will keep coming is going to keep increasing the
Yes.
pressure, and that's the point, right? The,
Some
the
of the
point of this is the pressure.
And some of the evidence that they cite is, I don't wanna use the word entertaining, but kinda like, "Ugh," like, So, like, one was, increased viruses being carried by insects. I think that was, like, some of the these environmental groups, what they're trying to claim is happening, because of big oil or whatnot. I think that was one of the things I read in the petition, which I
Yeah,
think,
I
like.
mean, it's everything, right? I mean, look, some of the conservative states filed a brief, and one of the things that they flagged repeatedly is to the left, everything is a product of climate change or everything contributes to climate change. So if they're able to bring lawsuits trying to say that somebody has to undo climate change, that's just a gateway for for Boulder, Colorado to get to control almost everything. Cows contribute to climate change. Farming contributes to climate change. Bugs are moving because of climate change, right? Like to your point, like everything flows into climate change and everything comes out of climate change. So if climate change gets to be their nuisance that they get to sue over, they love it because it gives them the ability to start to push on and control lots of things that are not about energy companies, right?
Yeah.
And that's the really concerning thing.
We've seen like lawfare explode, especially during the Trump era, prior to him being elected. And then obviously, like with him in office, with his executive orders, all those challenges to his agenda. Is it fair to call this like climate lawfare in terms of we're now trying to see politics, these liberal, left wing, um, environmental groups that are trying to use the courts to really accomplish, I guess, political goals?
Oh, yeah, 100%. I think you should even go broader, right? Climate lawfare is this really big silo within just woke lawfare. Because what you got to remember is the same legal theories that they're pushing in these climate change cases, they're pushing against gun manufacturers, right? And the next companies after the energy companies will be the utilities because they don't have enough windmills, right? It'll be against your local utility to drive up your bill and make it look like California, right? So you've got to think of it much broader. I mean, the one thing a phrase that I have that I think is a little bit depressing, but I think it's important for people to hear is if there's something you're doing in your state or county, even if you don't have a single Democrat that's been elected in your area that doesn't match progressive lifestyle choices, they've got a lawsuit for that. Whether it's about your cars, whether it's about the fact that you have a gas powered car, whether it's your electricity bill at home, whether it's your gun, whether it's the fact that you use plastic straws, they have a lawsuit for that. And the goal is they keep losing at the ballot box. They haven't been able to pass the Green New Deal or any of these other things in Congress. So they're going to turn to the courts, right? And it's going to be a little bit slower and more herky jerky than if Congress just said no more plastic straws.
Right.
But their game plan is to get that outcome by bringing enough lawsuits that they get it, right? So I think you got to say this is just woke lawfare.
Okay, interesting. What is the guess? Is there? So it takes four justices, right, to take up a case.
Yeah.
And this one is still, my understanding, pending, right? Like cert. Am I
Yes.
okay? So
Yep. That's exactly right.
what do you think the chances are that we could see four justices say yes? Like we need to weigh in now.
I think it's a very reasonable chance. I mean, this topic is going to come up to the court, and it's going to come up to the court now or later. And I think one of the things that is really being pressed by the experts that I know is um it's better to take one of these sooner rather than later because you're starting to see the effects of states reaching into other states.
That's so
Right?
true.
This
And like
isn't a
I know, like we talked about Hawaii and New York, and like how different
yeah.
lower courts are handling them as well. There
Yes.
definitely seems like there
This
needs to
isn't
be more
about
guidance.
one state. This isn't about the energy industry. This is ultimately getting down into that core concept of California, Vermont, and New York trying to regulate inside Alabama, inside Florida, inside Georgia. And that can't that it's better to take those questions sooner because you're going to end up with them on the back end.
Mhm.
Right? That's the one thing that is very consistent when you talk to people is it the court's going to end up with these questions, so better to have them take them now.
Right. And I wanna move on to the other case, which is already scheduled
Yeah.
for oral arguments, I believe, in January. Now I might butcher the name of it, so, you'll have to help me, but
That
it's
would put you on a
Chevron.
long line with me and many others.
So it's Chevron versus, I believe it's Plaquemines Parish out of
I
Louisiana?
say Plaquemine Parish, but I'm
Okay,
also
there
not
you
from
go.
Louisiana, so,
Can you explain this one and how it's tied into climate lawfare too? I mean, this is one
yeah.
of those ones that kinda the allegations are surrounding things that happened with the oil companies back during World War II when we were during war, right? When there was a need for like production.
Mhm.
Can you explain this one?
Yeah, so I think the easiest way for people who don't do law every day is that this is just a different version of the same thing that I just described with that Boulder case. They're not citing climate change and saying that that's the existential crisis, but they're asking for the same thing. They're suing energy companies and they're saying, hey, 50 years ago, 70 years ago, 80 years ago, you produced oil and gas here in Louisiana, and we don't think you got the right permit 80 years ago, or we think that you got a permit and didn't follow it to a T, and so now 80 years later, we're going to come to you and say that you have to make all of the areas of Louisiana that have energy production that we think didn't have the right permit look like it did if you had never been here.
Okay.
Right. Well, I mean, to me, that's very, very close. It's legally there's a distinction, but it's basically the same thing. Hey, could you just rip it all up and pretend like you were never here? Because we couldn't ban the energy industry. So we're just going to say that the permit failure over here in 1942 means that you now have to rip it all up today. Right. So it's the same kind of climate lawfare, woke lawfare. And this case is a very nerdy one in the sense of like the real question before the court is, does Louisiana and these parishes, do they get to sue in federal court or state court?
Yeah, that's what I was
But
gonna
what's
ask
really,
you.
yeah,
Yeah. And is there a could it be that the way the court comes out on this one, does that have any impact on, like, what we were just talking about with the Colorado cases or the other cases that are, popping up across the country? Because I know that was an issue, like, do is it should it be a Hawaii court that gets to decide
yes,
how to punish big oil, right? Because I
yes,
think they ruled against big oil out there. Um,
yeah.
like, I mean, could there be some overlap here in what the court says in this case with how some of these others are playing out?
Yes, and I think that's what's not been talked about enough is that this case arises from that same lawfare approach, and a loss for Plaquemine Parish in Louisiana on these questions will be the first time that you really get the court weighing in and talking about how much one state gets to affect all of these things, right? So it will be if it goes forward in federal court, there's federal law that seems like it will shut down the whole lawsuit,
Okay.
right? So it won't just be who gets to decide, that'll be the end, right? So I
Mhm.
think that's the most important thing for people to know is the case is all about which court does it get to go forward in, but there's a lot of strong indications and I would say very strong indications that if it goes in federal court, that Supreme Court says that's the end, right? And that would be a huge win from the consumer perspective. But that would also have the court tackling some of these core questions of when you're suing over energy production, when you're suing over 80 years of energy production, when you're asking for relief that will affect places well beyond your own jurisdictional boundaries. Um, do you get to do that? Or is there got to have to be some federal guardrails that prevent that? Are there gonna have to be some ways that prevent California or Boulder from reaching all the way into another state and meddling, right? And those are, like, really core foundational structural constitutional questions that are simmering in the courts. And so I think Plaquemine needs to be seen as a really big deal because it's the kind of stalking horse first out the gate in this woke lawfare campaign at the Supreme Court. And it is the first chance we'll have where the court's going to get to stretch some of their muscles on these topics.
Great. I wanted to ask, I always ask at the end of my interviews, is there something I should have like a question should have posed that I didn't that, you think is important or, any other environmental cases that you have your eyes on that you think you should mention for me?
No, I mean, so the one thing I will flag for everybody is that it is very easy, even when someone is as astute enough to tune into your show, to get a little bit lost in this is a removal case about federal officer question
Right, right.
jurisdiction, or this is a question about public nuisance and preemption under the Clean Air Act and the Savings Clause. I think it's really, really important. I don't think it's too salacious to talk about. Like, some of this litigation, all of it comes out of that same climate lawfare strain of the woke lawfare campaign. And I think it's really important for people to understand what is actually happening here. Okay. So whether it's this Plaquemine Parish case that's about permits, whether it's the Boulder case that's about public nuisance, whether it's one of these climate superfund laws like Vermont has passed or New York has passed that try to just skip all the way to the end and just send a bill to energy companies for the amount of money that climate change has cost them, like just let that sink in. They're not even bothering to sue. Um, all of it's designed to do one thing, which is David Bookbinder gave a speech recently. He's one of the people who pushes these lawsuits, and the first thing he said is that these lawsuits are designed to basically get a carbon tax in the country, even though Congress didn't do it. You're basically recreating a carbon tax through the courts. That got a lot of attention. Okay, but I think what needs to get a lot more attention is the next thing he said, which is he said, "Don't worry, everyone, this will work out. We're just trying to push these companies into bankruptcy. When they go into bankruptcy, they will be handed over to their creditors. Now, I'm still going to use some legal words, but like what he means is for Boulder and Honolulu and Baltimore to basically be the owners of our national energy infrastructure, because that's what they get when the companies go into bankruptcy. They have enough of a legal claim to basically own them. The game plan here is to force this entire disfavored industry into bankruptcy so that it can be managed and run by progressive cities to accomplish their progressive goals, unlocking money to feed into their preferred network of outfits and change their behavior, right? Once you own them, you get to decide whether they're going to even still exist, right? So I really think people need to understand that if you're seeing a lawsuit, whether it's about climate change or permits in World War II in Louisiana, there's one game plan, which is we drive up the liability number big enough to force all these companies into bankruptcy where they then get handed over. That's even more extreme than Bernie's Green New Deal, right? So their dream here is we couldn't get the Green New Deal, so we'll just shoot bigger, which is a takeover of the whole industry. And so I just think people need to know if you see a lawsuit that involves some county or city somewhere suing an energy company, or the next ones will be the utilities, or the next ones will be the car manufacturers. They're just trying to take a disfavored industry, capture it, and then run it themselves for their own purposes, which are very likely not going to match what you as the consumer at home would like the energy industry or your
Yeah.
utility or your car dealer to actually be doing.
I think a perfect way is what you said earlier, like a work around Congress, which I haven't
Yes.
covered the Supreme Court. I know there's a few justices, Justice Gorsuch, one comes to mind that would say, if you have a problem, you need to take it across the street, not bring it
Yes.
to the court like that. But yeah, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for shedding light on these. We'll have to follow them closely.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in to the latest episode of Court Watch. If you have not subscribed yet to this podcast, please do so. And also feel free to email me interesting questions or topics that you want explored about the legal reporting world. I'll do my best to answer them during each episode. Listen to my podcast, Court Watch, at washingtontimes.com or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to hearing from you all soon.